What is the cost of defiling a god? In Bloodborne, the corpse of the Great Old One Kos is reverently worshipped by a small fishing hamlet. Parasites crawl from her body and mutate her followers into these sea creatures with scales and shells and dorsal fins. But when scholars arrive in search of Kos's secrets, they dissect her followers in these brutal experiments, desecrate her corpse, harvest her blood and umbilical cord. They kill the unborn child still in her womb. As punishment for their depravity, Kos curses them. Forevermore, they'll be sent to the hunter's nightmare and death, consumed by this unquenchable bloodlust, forced to hunt and kill and relive their crimes for eternity. The curse is only broken when the player defeats Kos's orphan spirit, freeing it from limbo so the mother and child can be reunited. The hunter's nightmare ends. Curses show up all the time in fantasy as these powerful forces in the story and world your characters face, and we use them to do and explore all sorts of different things. They're often cyclical in nature, like in Bloodborne. The curse manifests when there's some great injustice or imbalance, and the only way to break them is to right the wrong that caused them in the first place. This video is sponsored by Delete Me, which helps you, yes you, protect yourself in the digital age by putting your personal data back into your hands and taking it away from pesky data brokers. This idea that curses can only be broken by setting right some injustice is a very human way of looking at the world, a kind of karmic magic. It's no wonder so many of our stories revolve around it. It's a belief we fall back on over and over to make sense of right and wrong out there. Like in the 1950s, the American government displaced over 700 families from land they'd owned and worked for generations in order to build a reservoir called Lake Lanier in Georgia. Some were displaced, others sold their land, but the money the government gave them was hardly sufficient. So they watched as their homes and churches, the graves of their ancestors, which the officials promised to relocate but never did, were flooded. Hundreds of years of history washed away, buried. Now, Lake Lanier is rumored to be cursed. About 700 people have supposedly died there since the lake was first created. People talk about hearing cries for help from the empty water, church bells tolling beneath the waves. The curse can only supposedly be undone by finally honoring the graves abandoned beneath the lake and bringing the lake's dark history to light, righting the wrongs of the past. In fantasy, curses often manifest in objects and places. They concentrate on them, almost like the horror of the past of the real world leaks into the soil, into things around us. They remember even when we don't. You can use curses like this to explore the relationship humanity has with its own past, violently reminding us that we don't just get to walk away and forget. It's why so often characters find themselves dealing with curses from their parents and grandparents, from maybe things they don't even remember happening. So when you're crafting your world or story, what injustices might people have forgotten which had given rise to curses? What kind of beliefs would people develop to kind of understand injustices from the past? And how does the shape the curse takes, what it actually does, reflect the injustice it came from and the way it might need to be fixed? Because curses aren't just random, they have rules, and in this way you can think of curses not just as like a vehicle for plot, but for themes and symbolism. But not all curses in fantasy are about karma, about injustice. In fact, my favorite kind of curse really has nothing to do with good or evil or imbalance at all, nothing so dramatic. Instead, I actually think some of the most interesting stories here are about curses which draw their power from how a person sees themselves and the world, the power of belief. In Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle, Sophie convinces herself that she's this plain and unremarkable older sister, destined for a quiet life in the shadows. So when the Witch of the Waste curses her, transforms her into this old woman, she thinks it's this horrible curse which only the witch can remove, poor her. But in reality, it just externalizes the way she already sees herself. She's always felt old and invisible and unworthy, and now that's being reflected outward. Which is why, as Sophie is thrust into adventures with Hal, she begins to forget to doubt herself, and in those brief moments when she speaks her mind, acts boldly, her youth comes back. She can only break her curse by realizing she was never as unremarkable as she believed in the first place. But to really understand this, I want to tell you about a story called Another Girl Under the Iron Bell by Angela Liu, which tells the story of a demon called Kyo, trapped by a contractual curse to obey a man called the Kechi. It's only in breaking the curse contract that Kyo starts to imagine herself as neither demon nor human, to imagine herself on her own terms, and there's something really beautiful in how she writes this. I don't know when I was born, if I'd replaced another girl, or if I'd simply devoured her waterlogged corpse by the river's end along with fragments of her memories. I only remember the sound of water, the smell of lilies, the longing for warmth. Are curses born or simply distilled from collective misery? As I killed Akechi, I wanted to ask him if he really understood how many ways a body could lose meaning, and afterwards, I imagined myself as neither human nor demon, but as a songbird perched on a high branch, ready to alchemize the air in my lungs into music instead of fire. We see in these lines how Kyo starts to literally conceptualize herself differently after the curse is broken, no longer in the terms and definitions imposed by her by the contract, but also how when she was born, there was this sweetness to her and innocence, only lost in that distilled collective misery she gets caught up in. When she says, I wanted to ask him if he really understood how many ways a body could lose meaning, it's about how other people, the expectations imposed on us, just as much as curses, can literally rob us of our own bodies and identities and minds, to imagine we can make music instead of fire. These curses are only as terrible and powerful as the lies characters tell themselves about themselves and the world, and to break them, these beliefs need to be rewritten. They mirror real struggles that we all have, family, society, tradition, these big things which kind of tell us who we are and what we're worth and what our place is, what we can or can't do. And the moment that we start believing that narrative, we give them power over us. Stories like these usually rely on a shift in perspective, a moment of self-realization for the character, where they confront who they are and they see who they can be, and they're capable in that moment of breaking the curse. These stories are almost always about characters journeying to self-acceptance, to self-worth, to asserting their agency. They're undoing a spell, breaking a curse, but they're also breaking the control other people and their beliefs have over them. And this is a really visceral way to explore that, to make that story come alive. But Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite examples of a really common curse trope, transformation. It transforms Sophie to reflect her lack of self-esteem, whereas a lot of curses transform a character to reflect an evil deed they've committed. You've seen this in Beauty and the Beast. It's a frequent narrative trope because it's all about the curse becoming a catalyst for character change, often forcing them into the shoes of those they've wronged.
Pull the lever, Kronk.
Giving them similar weaknesses and vulnerabilities, ostracization, depriving them of the advantages or abilities that they might have otherwise relied on before, forcing them to ask, who are they outside of these things? Who can they be? There's something really powerful about a character growing into someone who deserves to be freed from their curse because they've genuinely changed, learned from past mistakes, and in that, freed themselves. We don't just love tropes like breaking a curse because they're inherently interesting, we love them because we use them to explore familiar and interesting ideas, though I will admit that we all are going to have some soft spots for particular tropes. I love a talking sword, I love a conspiracy, I love elemental magic systems. But here's the thing, all of these stories aren't really about the curse, they're about a character fundamentally deciding who they are. And that's what storytelling is about. Speculative fiction just gets to bring that question to life in more visceral ways.
At other times, curses are a weapon. They've long been thought of as this evil kind of magic because they're rooted in negative emotions, jealousy, hatred, envy, maybe a desire for power to control someone. A curse is something you inflict on someone for selfish gain. And there is no better example of this than Berserk's Brand of Sacrifice, where someone marks the people around them to be sacrificed all so they can ascend to a kind of godhood or power. We're told that, quote, the lives of those who bear the brand from the last drop of blood to the last moment of your agonizing death will feed life to the new child of darkness. Guts and Casca, as well as others, are branded for someone they thought was on their side, doomed to be ritualistically murdered. And because they survived, they're forced to be hunted by monsters and the dead. The brand itself is agonizingly painful a lot of the time. The curse in Berserk is especially evil because of the level of betrayal it represents, the personal dimension. It's a scar that'll travel with you forever. Unlike a lot of other kinds of magic, curses have a very personal and moral weight as a weapon. Going up against a curse can mean going up against the forces of fate, of doom, of destiny, becoming something horrible instead of something great. In this way, you often get to play with those tricks of irony, with characters causing their fate instead of avoiding it. The knowledge that they're bound for a certain end can be a pressure in itself in your story. How do you reckon with the terrible knowledge of your future? It does, in a sense, strip a character of freedom and agency, and they're left asking who they are with this hanging over them. Interestingly, the location of the cursed mark on Guts in Berserk and other characters in the story can say something about them. For Guts on his neck, it's a vulnerable spot in his armor, a reminder of his mortality. If this curse manifests physically in a mark or something else, consider what other ideas you might communicate through that very physical, tangible effect on the body. The curse in Berserk is a constant presence in the plot, something forcing our characters forward and that they feel like they can never meaningfully escape. It ups the tension at any given moment and elevates the grimdark elements of your story. Death follows, always, and it isn't even their fault. In this way, curses are going to operate differently from genre to genre, and how the curse comes about, how it's broken, whether it can be broken at all, is going to do a lot to the tone of your story.
And I think this is why we get so many fantasy stories where curses become this way of characters making sense of the unknown and unexplainable. In What Remains of Edith Finch, we're confronted with this family history that's full of tragedy and death. One member is hit by a train, another drowns as a baby, another takes their own life, each and every person seemingly suffering some strange and untimely fate. Over the generations, the family starts to believe they've been cursed. It's not clear how or why, perhaps some sin of their ancestors, but the great-grandmother boards up the rooms of those that die, turns them into these untouchable shrines, never to be changed or stepped in again, only observed. Death remains with them. The family clings to death. Another, unable to deal with all this tragedy, hides away in an underground bunker for decades and slowly loses their mind. This obsession with death grows across the generations as we get told about this curse being passed down, like it's something in their blood. This kind of thinking is, well, it's very human, isn't it? If people suffer a tragic chain of events that they struggle to understand, they'll often turn to stranger explanations. Perhaps there must be some great evil, some terrible cause for all this incomprehensible personal tragedy. It's almost conspiratorial, a way of explaining the inexplicable, of wrenching deeper meaning from the pain. And that's a really fascinating feeling to explore in a character, a really fascinating internal conflict to delve into in your narrative. Throughout the game, the protagonist uncovers the stories of their relatives' deaths, and we start to see how it was all romanticized or exaggerated. The family came up with these tales crafted to mystify these tragedies instead of dealing with their grief in any real way. Whether or not the curse is real, the true problem is the inability of the Finch family to deal with these tragedies and deaths healthily, a kind of mentality and a set of behaviors passed down through the generations. Whether the curse truly exists is unclear, but it is clear by the end of the game that if it does, it's been broken. Edith Finch manages to break the curse, if it ever existed, by helping her son mourn healthily. He comes and places flowers at her grave. She helps him understand that these tragedies are what they are, the complexities of life, and you've got to move on. The intergenerational cycle of the curse is broken by this grieving ritual. She doesn't carry on those destructive behaviors and myths through to her son. Ultimately, how a character imagines a curse, how they think about breaking it, whether or not it's real at all, tells us a lot about how they think, about how they're internalizing their issues. And that's a really fascinating place to put a character. Superstition tells us a lot about someone, because there's something strangely comforting about curses. As terrifying and deadly and dangerous as they often are in all these stories, they offer something that the real world often deprives us of. a reason for why things went wrong and a tangible way to fix them. We get to impose a narrative on the world which may not exist. It is a very intoxicating mindset. It's no wonder that humans, as much as characters, are drawn to them. Curses are a relief. This is also why we use curses in all these stories to often represent kinds of pain which can be passed down through the generations. Patterns of abuse, of addiction, of illness handed down from parent to child. A curse kind of externalizes those generational struggles and makes them into something tangible. This idea that substance abuse runs in the blood, that mental illness is an inherited genetic thing. These challenges do have very real environmental and genetic causes, and without prevention can feel as inevitable as a family curse. And it's fiction, it's metaphor, it's speculative elements in fantasy and sci-fi which let us kind of viscerally depict these struggles in ways that other stories might not be able to help people understand who might not have experienced them firsthand. And then other stories use curses to explore larger cycles of harm and violence, like Princess Mononoke. In Princess Mononoke, the people of Irontown and the gods of the forest are locked in this endless cycle of retaliation, and Ashitaka gets this cursed arm after touching a boar infected with a bullet from Irontown. It corrupts his arm and it gives him power, it gives him this desire and ability to kill easily, but giving into that would only let the curse consume him further. When Ashitaka meets Lady Eboshi, his arm literally tries to draw his sword and kill her, but he has to stop it, he has to resist it. He doesn't want to feed into this cycle of violence which would only make the curse stronger, help it spread. Eventually, the forest spirit gets decapitated, the crescendo of this orchestra of death. And it's only when Ashitaka helps retrieve the head and return it in a symbolic act of healing and restoration, when he helps the humans break free by working with them to rebuild Irontown with a newfound respect for the natural world, that the curse goes away. He has to break that cycle in a meaningful way. But this does lead to kind of a writing problem because, as we said, curses give a clear reason why something went wrong and a tangible way to fix it. And because of that, a lot of the time breaking the curse is, in the big scheme of things, relatively simple. Burn the house, kill the witch, destroy the object.
Fight, and I will release you from this living death!
But these sorts of issues are not easily solved. It's why What Remains of Edith Finch and Princess Mononoke, I think, resonate more. Like, breaking the curse in these stories isn't just some magical act and voila, curse gone. No, they demand the characters face some deeper emotional reckoning, address the root causes of the pain, the cycles of harm which affect everyone, and keep the curse going. This is why bad curse stories often end up with kind of a clumsy metaphor or thematic messaging, where this really interesting conflict is solved in a way that leaves you kind of raising an eyebrow, and you're left asking kind of what are we saying here? Whereas the good ones like Princess Mononoke, you can really kind of come to understand this whole cycle of violence and how it might be solved through the resolution of the story. What is interesting is how often ritual shows up as the way you have to break the curse in these stories, right? Symbolic acts of magical power. Ritual being a way humans have interfaced with things they don't fully understand for millennia. But this is an interesting writing and world-building opportunity for your story. Which things carry symbolic power in your story and world for your characters, and how would a ritual to break the curse reflect them or the world you've created? An interesting trope which shows up a lot in these stories is where the cursed object or place becomes this living, thinking, feeling, interfering character in its own right, able to shape the story and characters around it, like the One Ring. My precious! And breaking that curse means contending with the will of that other character. In the legend of Vox Machina, Grog finds this cursed talking sword that drinks the blood of its victims to enhance its power and strengthens its wielder. The more he uses it though, the more addicted he becomes to its power, until one day he enters a battle frenzy and accidentally hurts one of his friends. Eventually he decides to get rid of the sword, to break it, but the sword fights back, it threatens him, it withers his arm, and even though Grog wins, he's left physically drained, and he's had to give up the strength that he learned to rely on. Cursed objects like this can be a really interesting source of conflict for your characters. We get to explore how easily our characters can be tempted, how willingly they'll let themselves be corrupted, what they'll give up for power or whatever else the curse offers, but also what the object or cursed place means to them, why they wouldn't let it go. A cursed object can be precious for other reasons. Maybe it's a family heirloom, the old family home. If it gives them power, if they come to depend on it in some way, then letting go of it becomes a costly sacrifice. They might be losing part of themselves to it. You get to ask who your characters are without the curse, and they might not like the answer. The tension story often isn't just about setting an injustice right, but reckoning with the character's desire for power, their fears, their attachments to whatever this thing or place is. In other stories, the curse can't be broken, but it can be lawyered on a technicality, on a loophole your characters can exploit. In The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Addie bargains to live forever, but at a steep price, that she'll be forgotten by everyone she meets. So she drifts through the centuries utterly alone, leaves no trace behind, until she meets Henry, who's, funnily enough, made a similar bargain. When someone looks at him, they will see what they desire most: the perfect son, the brother, the lover, in exchange for his soul. And because of that, he can remember Addie. Henry finds a way to defy the rules of her curse. He writes a novel about Addie, making sure that she will never truly be forgotten again. Do you remember those old email chains with creepy stories which warned of some evil spirit demon thing, and if you didn't forward it to 10 people, it was going to come for you? You could avoid the curse by spamming 10 other people, but you couldn't really break it in the email. This is basically the plot, by the way, of It Follows, a horror film where the curse takes the place of this ever-chasing monster, which can only be transferred through sex. So, instead of escaping the curse, the character is essentially buying themselves some more time and distance by choosing the monster's next victim. Passing on the curse is a way to keep yourself safe, but it also means you're endangering someone else. You're inflicting the curse to save yourself. These kinds of curses are tricky. They're designed to catch your characters in a no-win situation, which is why getting out of them is kind of a test of their ingenuity. And this can be a really creative knot of tension, because we get to see who your characters are through how they outsmart the curse, what they're willing to risk, how smart they are, what truly matters to them, and fundamentally, their morals, what they actually do with this dilemma. But there is a question at the end of all of this. What if there is no way out? No loophole you can exploit, no technicality, no way to break it at all? What if we just have to live with the curse? Which is why we're going to talk about Shrek, one of the best films ever made. Fiona spends years believing that being an ogre is kind of the worst thing in the world, that her curse needs to be lifted to have this perfect fairy tale ending. But in the end, her journey is not about breaking the curse at all. It's about learning to love herself for who she is and realizing that it isn't a curse. But in the end, the journey to accept or reframe a curse can be just as powerful as breaking it. Except I have to say, something irks me about curse stories. I don't know if it irks you, but it does me, that almost all of them just end when the curse is broken. And I get why they would do that, but very rarely do we get to see what life is like after the curse is over. The only one that I can even think of is the TV series Once Upon a Time, and I'm not saying it's good, but if I remember rightly, it's set in this world where kind of this evil queen has set a curse over everyone, but then they break it, and most of the rest of the series is them trying to figure out how to live with the consequences of everything that happened to them in the curse. That stuff can't be undone. We see characters living with what was taken from them, and the queen herself kind of grappling with why she laid the curse in the first place. I don't remember much of the series, but these are interesting questions. Your characters are still going to be traumatized. They're going to have to live with the maybe terrible things that they did in order to break the curse or live with it at the time. And how do you find happiness and imagine yourself after you emerge out of this thing which may have defined so much of your life for so long? Who are you? Who are you, and what do you want unburdened by the past? How do you live with, as Angela Liu writes, all the ways a body can lose meaning? Shrek 2, the best Shrek film, kind of plays with this, but I'm not sure I've ever seen a story which really tackles it head on, so who knows, maybe that'll be you. Likewise, sometimes there is no undoing what's happened to us with a nice little clean fix, a little magic ritual. No. We can't reverse the damage, but we can find a way to live with it. A central part of the conflict is like, how do I face my family when the cursed part of my life is over? And it's amazing, like it genuinely is. I'm sure that the other Shrek films lived up to that hype.
Oh, come on, I was just kidding.
The stories which play with this idea the most I've found are actually ones where like the character destroys the cursed object, and we sometimes get to see a lot more after that, and it can be really fascinating. A typical narrative trope is where a character relies on something and then the author takes it away from them so that they can ask, who are you without it? George R. Martin does this a lot with characters like Jaime and Bran and Tyrion. But I can see how a curse, positive or negative, can still fundamentally shape our understanding of ourselves, of whether we can alchemize the air in our lungs to make music or fire. But I want you to tell me down below, what's your favorite curse from a fantasy story you love? Why? What does it do that kind of like draws you to it? Curses are power, and some are even based on what you know about another person, their true name. You have a lock of their hair. In other words, their data. You might not know this about me, but I hate that everything has an app these days. It infuriates me to no end that I walk into a store and just to buy something I have to hand over my name and email address and number and my mother's maiden name and my social security number. I actually don't have a social security number, but like 50% of my audience is American, so I assume you do. Just to order a goddamn pizza, and it's led to me basically refusing to hand over my information wherever I can. I don't want a random hardware store to know my name or email. I don't want them to know who I am. I want to buy my methamphetamine by the bucket in peace. Because the reality is that everyone wants your information these days because food is power, but so is knowledge, and knowledge is data, your information, my information. And then all these websites, these data brokers, they sell it around to who even knows, making it easier to dox you and stalk you and use your information. And I would know about the dangers of these as someone with a very public profile. I'm lucky that no one has tried to stalk me, that I'm aware of, but I know a lot of my female friends have had to deal with that. And all of this is why I'm happy that Delete Me is today's sponsor. Like legitimately, I told my wife about this and she's like, oh, this is so you, because they go after all these data brokers who hoard all of this information and sell it off, and they take your information back. That is what they do. They also take back, by the way, my wife's information, because my wife can be used to get to me and I can be used to get to her. They help take away, family information. Plus, Delete Me puts their money where their mouth is and supports organizations like the EEF and more data privacy protection legislation like California's Delete Act. Because you should be more protected by the law anyway. Like, they've already removed all this stuff for me. I am very conscious of how bad being so publicly online is for me, and probably for all of us, and it's not gonna fix everything without better legislation. But staying safe online in this world is more important than ever, and you can get Delete Me for 20% off if you use my code FUTUREME on screen right now, down the link below, but you will only get it if you use my link, if you use my code. So get your data removed and sink back into glorious anonymity with Delete Me, and you'll be helping out the channel in the process. But let's bring all of this together into a little summary. Curses often manifest with a great injustice, and the only way to break them is to set things right and restore balance. 2. Some curses stem from beliefs characters have about themselves and can only be broken through a moment of self-realization. 3. Curses are one of the ways we try to make sense of the unknown, of the things we can't explain or control. 4. Curses can symbolize cycles of harm that impact families, communities, and the world. 5. Sometimes the cursed object or place becomes a character in their own right who must be contended with in order to break the curse. And 6. Sometimes curses can't be broken, but they can be outsmarted through technicalities. But if there's no way out at all, maybe the only option is learning to live with it. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.